Hello and welcome to Washington Exec's video series. I'm your host, Amanda Ziadeh, and with me today is Mary Majoros, Director and Chief Strategist of the Intelligence and Legislative Sector at CGI Federal. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mary.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me, Amanda.
Of course. So we're here to talk about the acquisition process at federal agencies, which have undergone many reform efforts over the years. And while improvements have been made in terms of easing the process, I understand a common obstacle often discussed among senior federal procurement officials is the ability to increase acquisition agility in assessing unmodified, clean financial statement audit opinions, which is one of the government acquisition requirements. So, Mary, we're here to share with your expertise and help us unpack a bit of what's happened in acquisitions this year. There's no doubt that 2020 was an unorthodox year, yet the federal government's acquisition process seems to go largely undisturbed. The global pandemic didn't stop more than 500 departments and agencies were spending hundreds of millions of dollars on products and services needed to keep the government running. So, what have you been hearing from government contacts on the job?
Amanda, you're absolutely right. This has been a pivotal year across industry, both government and commercial. And we've been hearing across the spectrum that indeed fundamentally it has changed how people work, from where people work to how they work. And the federal acquisition community universally has stepped up to this challenge. I'm thoroughly impressed with how well they have pivoted their work, their processes, and their use of technologies to ensure continued mission success. They have shown, first and foremost, that they are the lifeblood of what keeps these agency missions going. And any impact to contracting for goods and services would be catastrophic. And they've lived through all of the challenges that this year has found. At an operational level, what has seemed resonant is around the ability to enable contracting officers and others key to the acquisition process access to agency contract writing or the acquisition management system from remote, unclassified, yet secure environments. Because quite often the system of record is in an agency environment, whether that be an unclassified or classified environment, it's still contained. So there's a recognition, particularly from agencies with systems of record that reside particularly in the classified environments, they need to have these dual domain acquisition capabilities to work in tandem. And so CGI is stepping up to that challenge, industry-leading technologies to enable this new kind of work. Now, what hasn't changed is, as we know, the high degree of complexity in the tradecraft of government acquisitions. The methods, the policies, and the strict compliance requirements, such as auditing, they all remain firm and unchanged.
So, considering from what you've been hearing from this experience in 2020, what are the biggest obstacles in the government's acquisition process today?
The biggest obstacles, I'd say, those that are the largest obstacles have continued to garner a great deal of attention and investment this year and over the past several years. So when you're looking at how to apply the FAR to its fullest extent to really expand acquisition thinking and to reduce self-censoring, I think, in how they go after new acquisitions, as well as to simplify and streamline the acquisition workflows. So it's no surprise that that consistent themes around greater use of other transaction authorities, greater emphasis around robotic process automation and machine learning to reduce redundancies and the manual labor. And as part of that, to increase the contracting officer capacity to focus on and support acquisitions of greater complexity. There's also been much greater collaboration across the federal domain for government personnel to learn and to share best practices from acquisition colleagues in other agencies. I'm thrilled to see these collaborations across the civilian, the defense, the homeland security, and the intelligence communities. These silos are really breaking down. And a particular obstacle that keeps rearing its head from our perspective when we're talking with some of the senior executives, and I'd have to say to some extent, particularly those agencies that are still having a challenge achieving clean audits, is the need to remain or actually achieve audit compliance while increasing acquisition agility. And so what we find is that this is kind of a trade-off between the two, and it's a really difficult challenge for some senior executives and their organizations to get their heads around how you manage the two in tandem.
So even under this environment, it seems like there's an active conversation surrounding whether one can achieve acquisition agility or audit compliance, but not
Right.
both. Is that the case?
It absolutely is. And quite often we hear as the two of these two items as forces that combat each other, that they're an inevitable zero-sum trade-off where if I want to be agile, it comes at the expense of being auditable. If I want to be auditable and compliance and in compliance that way, it could come at the expense of being agile. So that can be a tension that we're talking through with these senior executives to try to break that apart and bring it back together so that rather than an either or, we're saying, let's take out the or and replace it with and. How can I be agile and still compliant? How can I be compliant and achieve clean audits and still be agile? And by bringing that word and conjoining these two, which seem to be inherently, I'd say, conflicting tensions, by bringing them together, I think it really broadens options for problem solving.
So it's not necessarily a binary option, but in your opinion, what can government agencies do in changing hearts and minds of those who may not be convinced yet?
No, you're absolutely right. We're finding that there's 3 points of our conversation and things to consider as part of changing these thinking. And one of the shifts in thinking is, and it comes at a strategic level, you have to raise it up out of the tactical and the operational aspect of agency acquisitions. And we're finding that in order to stay, agile and compliant with being auditable takes a cycle of continuous improvement. And that's really hard to do when you've got standard operating procedures, when you've got pretty firm policies in place to build in a battle rhythm to keep yourself fresh and to keep the trade craft fresh. And what we have found is that a good analogy, albeit in the IT side of the house, under software development, is the application of agile methodologies and approaches. And it's particularly in those areas where there's frequent inspection and frequent adaptation. And so we're finding that that new battle rhythm and the thinking that comes around to keeping the tradecraft fresh helps put you in that continuous cycle of improvement. A second area is around embracing technologies. We find a number of organizations in the federal space where their financial platforms are not in sync real time with their acquisition platforms. And that's a very, very distinct and real challenge for them. These legacy contract writing systems or acquisition systems, by lacking this real-time financial integration, you also lack then the workflow capabilities and the data validation. Instead, you're having to rely on human validation or double entry. And as a result, these contract awards may contain discrepancies within agencies' available funds and propagate other areas. And then that just throws, the whole auditability risk higher. So we're finding that the modern integrated acquisition and financial platforms create that firm foundation where then you get that real-time interface. It removes the human error. It improves the contracting management and the financial data integrity, where that sense of risk with being auditable is removed. Not entirely mitigated, but it certainly reduces it from the factor of having an impact.
Right. So say an agency has adopted methodology, what are examples that you can give us of change management at work?
We have found, particularly in those areas where the agencies, I'd say from a technological perspective, where they've tried to start fresh by having an integrated financial management and acquisition system, they're in the position to be thinking more along the lines of how they can keep fresh. And so when I think about the work that we have with the Veterans Affairs, where they're approaching it from a multi-pronged implementation of our Momentum software, they are really modernizing their financial management systems and their acquisition management, particularly from the tradecraft perspective. Their goal is to not only to apply a whole new platform, but they're really applying a full court press for organizational change management. And so this really applies and recognizes almost the softer aspects of change that need to be applied, that focuses first and foremost on the workforce and on the trade craft, and how those inform the technical systems. And I'm really impressed with the work that they're doing there. We also find with the Library of Congress, we've got a different model there. It's more of a shared services model across the legislative branch agencies. And there, the Library of Congress system has been able to maintain full integrated financial and acquisition operations, increased autonomy and operational flexibility, cost savings, so that this then has resulted in over 20 consecutive years of independent auditors having issued unmodified opinions on their statements. So it's almost I shouldn't call it an afterthought, but it's much less of a hurdle to overcome that kind of system. I should say, by having an integrated system, it enables the agility, I think, so much. It makes it easier. It's more streamlined to achieve that. It's not as challenging in a strategic environment to make the critical decisions necessary for the workforce and for the systems.
So is there hope for the government acquisitions process to become more agile? And what are your hopes for the government acquisition process in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, great question. I firmly believe that the acquisition community is absolutely on the right track. Breakthroughs, sharing of best practices, cross-agency collaborations happening like never before. And I think to some extent, this COVID environment has helped break down those silos, because we have a commonality across then of looking to pursue this remote capability, right? And the fact that all of this attention and these innovations continued throughout 2020, I think is a very strong testament that government acquisitions will only become more and more agile and operate at the pace of mission, which is their vision.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for these insights, Mary. This is a timely topic, and it's been great having you. Thank you for joining me today.